There must have been a moment in the history of the music industry when executives sat around the boardroom table and said to each other, "You must realize this is all about to fall apart. And whether it falls apart in our hands or under our feet is the only strategic decision that we as an industry can make." I think we're going through a period of a similarly drastic, dramatic, unpredictable realignment in the video game industry generally and in the retro gaming subgenre specifically. Now, I'm only interested in video games from before the year 2000. What you see on screen here, running on a PlayStation 2, is called Tempest 2000. Of course, it's from long enough ago in history that the year 2000 had this romantic, optimistic, futuristic air to it. It seemed like an exciting time in the distant future. And now, of course, that marks it out as something from the distant past. There are companies trying to make money today, in the late 2020s, selling you the same games that are collected on these discs for the PlayStation 2 at a much, much higher price. If you really go through the list of what's included here, Taito Legends 1 and Taito Legends 2, and compare it to the value for money you're going to get, for example, from Evercade, which is a neo-retro mini console, or, for example, comparing it to going to Steam, the Nintendo Switch online store, so on and so forth. Amazingly, there is still an argument even now that buying these games for the PlayStation 2 is cheaper, whether you are narrowly looking at just the discs themselves, just the software, or you are looking at the whole gestalt. The hardware, and yes, y'all, the joysticks, the controllers. Right now, arcade quality joysticks for the PlayStation 2 are affordable, wonderful. They've certainly aged well. To get a joystick of this quality that works with Nintendo Switch, Xbox, current, you could be spending more money on just one joystick, a current gen Hori joystick, than you would spend buying a PS2 as a console and buying the entire library of games you want to play. Now, again, even if you are not so puritanically fixated on games from before the year 2000, as I am, even if you do not want to only and exclusively play games that take up 5 minutes, I don't play games for 1 hour ever. I'm looking for like the Pac-Man end of the arcade spectrum here. Let's say you're willing to play something from the leading edge of the year 2005, like Raiden 3 here. It's shocking to see that the cost to play this game as a digital download from Steam or as a new game purchased for the Nintendo Switch, it's actually more expensive to play this old game on current gen consoles than to buy yourself a PlayStation 2, again, what could be an amazing joystick, and to have something that's at least kind of tangible, something that's in some sense real. Now, there are disadvantages to tangibility. This screen for PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 is perfect. CRT is not perfect. HDMI is not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. This screen cost me $10 Canadian. It's perceived to be worthless, and it actually is worthless. But many of you might be disappointed if you got the classic Capcom arcade games or the classic Namco arcade games. You plug them into a current gen HDMI widescreen TV, and you can't believe you're playing Street Fighter Alpha and everything's distorted and stretched out of proportion. You're playing Galaga and everything's blurry. You're playing Dig Dug. You say, what's going on? And then even if you try to plug the PS2 into CRT, an old-fashioned cathode ray tube TV, you are going to be amazed at just how bad the picture quality can be. So, look, this TV behind me now, the $10 flat screen from a time before HDMI was invented. If I connect a Nintendo Wii to this and I run an NES game, an 8-bit NES game on a Nintendo Wii through the Virtual Console, on this screen, it's crisp and pixel perfect. I've heard all kinds of experts here on YouTube and on the internet claim that Nintendo Wii, the image is always going to be soft and blurry, especially with the Virtual Console. You're never going to be able to play those classic games with pixel perfect visual. On this screen, it's pixel perfect. So with this generation, or this demi-generation, you're not dealing with a simple categorical difference between HDMI and CRT. With the Sega Genesis, you need a CRT. That's it. And if any CRT will work. When you're talking about PlayStation 2, unfortunately, it's not enough to be smart and it's not enough to be virtuous. You've got to be lucky. You've got to try to get a flat screen TV from approximately the right era and hope that the parts fit and hope that the hardware and software works together. And by the way the images are rendered visually is very different from one game to the next. In many cases, as with the classic Namco games, you will find you can get a pixel perfect image out of the PlayStation 1 version very easily on a wider variety of screens. But then if you're loading the PlayStation 2 version, all of a sudden it's a nightmare and it has to be just the right screen that connects in just the right way. That is PlayStation 2. That's the price you pay. Obviously, if you want to play Street Fighter 3 on a current gen console like the Nintendo Switch, the image will be perfect through HDMI. If you want to play it via Steam, now again, Street Fighter Alpha, right? You can play the current gen version. But there are truly excellent versions of those games on PS2. And you may be looking at $5 a disc, sometimes 10, sometimes $15 a disc. At this moment, PlayStation 1 has become expensive and collectible. PlayStation 2 is still embarrassingly affordable and cheap. I have bought many games I will never play for more than 5 minutes. And yes, it is one of those interesting generations where you get almost but not quite redundant versions of games that are not the same as what came before or since, like Mega Man here. Unique version of Mega Man and Mega Man X. I've already vaguely alluded to the great array of Capcom games, Namco. And to close the video, let me just say, I made the decision to buy myself a PS2 because as I was coming to the end of my own retro gaming amassing period of my life, I had to admit to myself I really wouldn't be happy going into my grave or living out my retirement years without having any way to play Virtua Fighter at all. But I don't want to own a Nintendo Switch. I don't want to own anything more recent than the year 2000. Really. So I did agonize over it, but I decided I'm certainly not going to put the money into Sega Saturn. I'm certainly not going to put the money into the Dreamcast. It's like, okay. There's a moderate middle path here. I can buy a PlayStation 2, and even if the only games I ever have on it are Virtua Fighter and Tetris, I can be happy with that. And that's the generation for me. Because Sega has let us down in many ways. Nobody knows financially how well or how poorly Sega did in their period of trying to be a mini retro console company. But they've declared they've given it up. We're never going to get a Sega retro console that handles Virtua Fighter 2, for example. We're not going to get a sequel to the Sega Genesis Mini. Sega has declared their intention to not let their past success be an obstacle to their future success. I say to them, good luck. But for me, I had to make a decision about whether I was going to have access to Virtua Fighter at all or not at all, given that Sega was not going to keep recycling these things the way they had with, for example, the extremely expensive Astro City Mini, right? Well, the reality is I'm making this video today because I'm now packing up the PlayStation 2 to put it away, and it'll gather dust. I may never play it again, or I may not play it again for some number of years, or I may not play it again until I have a friend come and visit who's really into Street Fighter, because it's a great way to play Street Fighter Alpha, Street Fighter 3, or I have a friend who wants to play Soul Calibur, again, Virtua Fighter itself. I've bought these things. I'm now reviewing these things, and I'm aware it's not going to be a positive part of my life. It's just going to get packed up and end up in the closet like so many of these other things I've collected. But I understand, it's not Sega's job to curate their own history. It's not their job to put together a museum of the history of their own company for us to go in and have it. It's our job as collectors. I gotta tell you something. The PlayStation 2 era is the absolute nadir for Sega as a company. And in general, I think all of the Sega games of the PlayStation 2 are terrible. And it's not worth doing if that's what you want. It's definitely an era in which Namco is mopping the floor with Sega. Namco is making better racing games, flying games, but Namco is making better fighting games. This is the dominance of Tekken, this era, and so on. Tekken, Soul Calibur, so on and so forth. This is really when Namco is dominating the software field, and Sega is teetering on the brink of bankruptcy and coming out with the Sega Ages collection and so on and so forth. Sega is stumbling both backward and forward. But yeah, I made the decision to add this to my collection, and I'm making the decision now to wrap it up and put it away in the closet and not play it anymore. If you want to be able to reach out and touch the games from that era of history, whether you are thinking about, even the 1970s, the classic Atari games have versions. The 1980s, classic Namco games. The Taito games. The Capcom games. And yes, the Sega games. Even certain games we think of as Nintendo games, like a Mega Man. The PlayStation 2 at this moment is a great choice. And the value it offers you as a collector, as a consumer, is so great that I think it's an embarrassment and a challenge to Steam, to Evercade, to all the companies that are still trying to make money reissuing these old games and collections for current gen hardware.